Welcome to ArtBeat, Canada's art pulse. I'm your host, Katie. In this episode, we're diving into the world of Matthew Schofield, a Toronto artist whose work artfully merges the realms of photography and painting. Matthew's journey from architecture to fine arts has led him to a distinctive style, transforming everyday moments into compelling narrative scenes. His pieces, celebrated worldwide, invite us into a dialogue on the authenticity and transient beauty of life. Join us as we explore Matthew's process, the essence of creative problem solving in art, and how his work challenges our perception of the ordinary. Matthew, hi.
Hi, how are you, Katie?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Matthew, I would like to start from the beginning if we can. I'm curious if you can tell us what sparked your journey into art.
Well, I think you have to go pretty far back, and I'm kind of lucky that way because I have two brothers who are really good at sports, and I have two parents that were into teaching, and so I'm the middle child of three boys, so they sort of saw something that I excelled at that wouldn't compete with my brothers, and encouraged it, and because it's something that I just gravitated towards, so it's really something I always did, but it's not something that was in my family. So it's kind of a fun and interesting journey for them to figure out how to get me the knowledge and skills I needed to go down the path of making art or being an artist. That goes really far back, but I think there's other things along the way. When you see someone do something that you just can't figure out how they did it, I find that to be like a mystery or a puzzle, or something creative that you want to solve yourself or figure out yourself. And it's kind of magical that everyone does something different with the same materials or something to that effect. You're just trying to figure out how someone else did it, not for yourself to do the same thing, but to add to your the creative process or the puzzle that is making artwork.
So, growing up and painting, was there a specific defining moment or decision that you can recall where you understood or knew somehow that pursuing art with it being more than a passion was what was happening?
Well, in high school, you can kind of tell what you excel at, and by your grades or by your interest or by the activity you do in those classes. And I think at that stage, I was torn between math and art, which is a weird avenue to go down, right? So I went to a guidance
subjects.
Yeah. And I went to a guidance counselor, and you kind of look for the career paths that have both in them. And the one that sort of piqued my interest was architecture. So I went to school for architecture and art history at Carleton, and I realized that was not for me. So I went to art college after that. And I think there's different creative problem solving things you can do with art, in art, and that have math levels to it. Like you're trying to, again, I talked about earlier, you're trying to solve problems or figure things out, and your own visual language or all those things that come with creative problem solving. That's where I think that I would say the next part of my journey was to try to figure out what to do, was maybe make a mistake, go and do something that wasn't for me, and figure out that I was missing out on something that was more for me.
I have a bit of a follow-up question because I saw a video that Metivier Gallery had put out, and I was able to see you in your studio.
Yeah.
and you were referencing a photograph. And so I'm wondering if ratio between the photograph and your painting, does that tie in a bit to what you were just talking about?
Yeah. I thought about this last night, and sort of the idea of transforming a photograph into a piece of art, into a painting. And why would you do that? And I think there's always a reason you should ask yourself why you do anything. But if you can't figure it out, that's also fine too, because you're trying to solve. Again, there's mysteries to art, and I would say that the initial scale aspect of it was that these things were objects. They were taken, not as a defining moment. Often it's just sort of a snapshot or a throwaway moment or something that, when film was precious, you might take 12 pictures a year. So it was probably an important moment or something, a coming together or something like that, an event. And then put in a drawer, and sometimes framed and sometimes poorly composed, but they are a reference or a record of something. And then turning them back into, turning them into a painting, there's a level of time spent with that. Over the course of a few days of painting, and then when you get to the end of it, you've started to recognize things within it that, it becomes a very calculated or thought out picture, because you can see what time was on the wall and the clock, and were they eating dinner, and was there leftovers, and things that you wouldn't normally notice if you hadn't spent a few hours staring at this thing. So back to your question. I think there is a connection of, what to paint and how to get better at what you want to do. And what are the things that, one of the weird goals I set for myself was I wanted to try to paint everything. And how do you do that? It's like you'd have to buy cars, and there's a consumerism aspect to that. So within photographs, there is, you're going to come across things from all different eras and all different times, and you're going to notice something like fur or glass or challenging objects that how do you translate that into paint, which has always been a challenge, but even on a 2D level, because it's a translation of a photograph to paint. What's the artist's hand and eye doing? What's the whole point of it all? If it's I'm not trying to recreate it verbatim. It becomes a secondary object. And some people have to ask me, have you ever thought of showing the photograph beside the painting? I would never do that. It just doesn't appeal to me. I didn't even think of that. It's so far removed from the I guess the goal or the interest of what I'm up to. And one of the reasons why I like painting photographs or start there is because it was a taboo that, as you went to art school, they really encouraged you not to paint from photos. They wanted to paint from life. And I thought I think it's really important to learn how to paint a three-dimensional object and see it in a room and see how light changes through the day. And then at the end of it all, I thought, well, if it's such a taboo, then really you should always try to do something that someone tells you not to do. And especially in art.
And can you actually talk a little bit about the last series that you did? I find it incredibly fascinating.
Yeah. It's called Force Majeure. I'm really happy with the title, that it's not a translatable title, really. The idea is it comes up in insurance policies of acts of God. You can't predict what's going to happen, and so that body of work, I guess it would be prompted out of COVID. You couldn't go to places, you couldn't walk, you couldn't explore or get out, and you were confined and to that end, I went through my own archive of photographs versus I used to use other people's archives and sort of see what they were about and what their interests were. I kind of consider it portraiture when you do multiple paintings of someone's vantage point. So this one was more of my own, and it was kind of a nice investigation of where I've been, what I've done, who are, maybe the luxury of movement and revisiting places. And I was also thinking about this last night, the idea of being in the moment in places, and even like the fact that I took photos of them suggests that you have to remove yourself from something that was an experience to be something that is now a recording or an action of the space or wherever you are. And even by that action, you might be ruining the experience, and you're also not capturing everything. So, but at the same time, it is a really good memory prompt and an idea of what of being there and seeing the space. So I'm kind of torn between, I always tried to, there's a weird thing about trying to find idiosyncratic or autodidactic photos, like where someone's not an artist who's taken them, to try to find what their interest and importance is, right? So with my own work, am I taking the photo to make it into a painting or not? And I think that's the question that I wrestle with when it comes to, would this make a great painting? And so sometimes I just leave it. I'll take a picture, I'll leave it. I think, did you come by this honestly? Like, was this something that you were going to develop into a painting? If that's the case, then, where's the authenticity of it? So I put it aside usually and think about it for a long time before I come back to it.
So if you feel that the photo you've taken is, let's say, too artful in a way, or taken from an artist's lens, it feels less authentic to you versus if it were taken without that purpose in mind.
I think there is something to that. Like my other job is I work in film, and I was always really envious of people who had jobs that had they were able to do something with their art and get paid for it, and so they continue to develop what they were working on or what they were their skill set or their interests, and be keen on it on a daily basis. So you get to not just, I don't want to say exploit what you do, but you get to develop it, and it gets encouraged because you go in somewhere to an office or to a creative space, and you get to be around creative people, and then it just prompts more and more ideas. So I work in film, and the interesting thing about that is that at the time when I started in this industry, I was working with stills, like film stills for matte paintings. So I would do matte paintings in the backgrounds of shots and help develop them and make them look like different scenes or different areas, and then sometimes concept work. But those things, what I got to see over time is like how a director frames and films a shot, and how he composes or she composes a shot. And that's kind of a fun thing to notice. And I think that also prompted my interest in the amateur, because the professional will try to compose a shot to tell the story in the quickest way, or have a it's almost like a legacy. If you show something that everyone understands as this object represents this thing, then there's a shorthand to it. And I think that becomes very composed and very considered, and almost on a professional level. If you took that and painted that image, it would almost be plagiarism, because it's so recognizable as that person, because they're a professional photographer, or they have a professional cinematographer. Whereas someone on a more amateur level, there's an exposure of what their interests are and where they're coming from, and what they can't seem to hide, or how they sometimes struggle to get everyone in this frame. And there's something to it that I find fascinating, and I think that's sort of the thing I was hinting at in the past question, was what is authenticity? I don't know, but you're exposing a bit of yourself when you point a camera and take a picture by what you find valuable or interesting, or that type of thing. And it was an expensive pastime, and not everyone had access to it. So there's a limited amount of resources in the past, whereas now there's a lot of people that have access to phones and cameras, and so the world's very, very heavily documented. So where is the amateur image? What's important if you can document everything? So so there's almost like a curation now to what's worth investigating.
Did you feel a difference when you were painting between what you captured and the photos that the archival photos that you used?
Yeah, there is a difference, because so my father I can see he doesn't take pictures with his camera anymore, but he had about 3,000 to 4,000 slides. He took slides, and they were great. So they held up well. I had them scanned and gave a copy to everyone in my family of the scan. So they all have a digital version of that, but I also had them, and I did a series of paintings from them. And again, that's the idea of it was really an interesting portrait of him, because there's so many of his vantage point, and often images without him in it. But I think that the more you look at what someone is interested in, the more you get to know them. So there's a long-winded answer to your question. If I knew someone in the image, then you're doing a bit of portraiture. So you look, because you know that person, you know who they are, and you kind of you're trying to you try a bit harder to get a representation of that person potentially. And when I was working with strangers' photographs, I felt like it was less of a. I mean, you try to get a representation of them, I guess, if you're a representational painter, but it's not portraiture, and no one's going to be. If I offend someone by not looking real good, I'm okay with that. But it is in the back of your head when you're like, oh, I know that person. Is that a representation of who they are?
Do you know, and this may be an intuitive question, but how do you know when you've done enough with the painting based on the photograph? Because I feel like a photograph is very specific and finite. And your paintings, like you mentioned before, you don't try to make them exact or identical. So how do you discern when you've done enough to the painting based on, what you want to derive from the photo?
That's a good question. There'll be days when I don't want to leave the studio because I'm not happy with something. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave the studio and I'll come back the next day and I'll be thinking that I was crazy to worry about that. That's not the problem, or this is the problem. Or I'll ask my partner to come to the studio and she'll say, and I'll say, I really don't like this. What do you think of this? And she'll say, that's not the problem. This is the problem. And it's good.
An artist and an artist.
Yeah. It's so great because, you're so frustrated with something that you can't figure out what's satisfying, and someone else comes along and says, well, that's okay, but this is where you should focus next. And that's kind of like, you can move on. But there's a letting go. You could probably work on a painting for months and years, and it wouldn't get better. Mm-hmm. It would just be different,
Mm-hmm. Interesting point. It won't get better, but it will just be different.
Yeah. That's a trust in your own, like you have to trust in your own sensibilities and move on, I think. There's a movie, that a documentary I went to see years ago called Waiting for Hockney. And it's the story about this guy who was trying to do this drawing of the most dots per inch in a drawing. And he spent years on it, and it's you should watch it. I don't know if it's a validation for doing something, spending a lot of time doing something or not. I think that's sort of the crux of the question of the movie.
Can you tell us how your art has evolved over the years? Are you able to maybe trace its development for us?
I don't know. Some people say really nice things to me, and they like the current body of work, and that's always nice to hear. But I wouldn't have a clue as if someone said, make a painting that's going to sell. I wouldn't know what to do. I have an interest. I have a certain aptitude, and I really gravitate towards the thing that we sort of started talking about at the beginning. Is I really want to paint things and sort of develop. And I guess that's a good word when you're painting for photographs, is develop things over time and think about what's attractive in paintings. Like, this is something I've been doing for about 25 years, and I'm still not bored of it, which is kind of fun to know. Going to the studio is a treat, and I know it's a luxury, and I know that not everyone gets it. And I was able to do it. So I feel super fortunate to have that access and ability to do it. Have a job that allows me to get there, and the respects that's part of why they hired me, is to be creative. And I think that's so I know why I want to do it, but I don't know, if you ask me in 20 years what my artwork's going to look like, I won't know. I don't know what comes next until I see it's nice to have other people encourage you. I think that's a challenge as you get older as an artist. You don't go into critiques. You don't tend to have a classroom where you can, or colleagues that do studio visits. Some people are more open to that than others. But again, if you don't have a lot of time, you have to maximize your time at the studio. My partner does studio visits or mentorships, and it's incredible to see the people come in and how much they develop and how much they get out of it. And I think it's a worthwhile and valuable thing to do, especially to see how people improve. But it's something that, like, I'm quite happy with the gallery I'm with, because you get indirect feedback, or you get encouragement from them as well. I'm sure the indirect feedback would be like, "Hey, when's next body of work coming?" or that type of thing. But it's all good. Like, I think that it's nice to be encouraged to do something that you want to do in the first place.
Looking back, is there a particular phase or piece of your work that marked a significant shift in your style or approach?
Yeah, I think it was. It was scale. I worked from life, like I said, and I would work life size, and that's also. I think that prompted me to be very comfortable, with gestural movements. Mm-hmm. So I had some really good teachers at OCAD. I had some really good teachers at McMaster, but at OCAD, one teacher, the drawing teacher, Richard Robinson from Hamilton, and that's where I'm from as well, he just encouraged us to get 4x8 sheets of plywood and enough paper to cover it, and try to draw the figure on that to that scale. And that was, you didn't do that on the first day. You came in with a pad of paper, and then you graduated up to that. And he just would encourage you. And it was super fun to work that big and have the luxury of working that big because the classrooms could accommodate it. And I don't know if they can do that as much now, but again, this is the luxury of going to school in the 90s when, you had these big open air classrooms, and it was, and you worked from life, and you had a lot of one-on-one feedback and mentorship from the prof. And then painting at the same school, in the senior years with Natalka Hussar, she was really good at pushing us to think about what we were painting, like what is the psychological narrative? Why are you doing what you're doing? I think that's an important question to ask when you're approaching anything, but artwork specifically. I mean, to go back to school and talk about that foundational element, I think I don't know if that's where you develop something, but I think I wasn't doing my current body of work then. I did that sort of after school, but then I started to paint at a smaller scale in about 2005. And I thought it was kind of like giving yourself permission to go back down to something small after having painted really large. That again breaks with form. And like you said, the rebel side, you shouldn't be painting from photographs. You shouldn't be painting small. And I was like, oh, well, it's okay. I think I'm going to try this and see what comes of it.
How do you see your own identity reflected in your art?
And I think it does, and I think it should with a lot of people. But I think that the voice that I have is not as important as some of the other contemporary artists out right now. The stories that should be told are. I'm not saying that I have a lesser story, but I think there are some really good. There are some more important stories to be told. So but I will respond by saying about the idea of taking up space, and I think in the art world, I hope there's enough room for everyone. I hope that I'm not taking a spot from someone else. If I am, what I do has to be valuable and good and worthwhile, because I do think it's, as I said, there's a luxury to being an artist, or not being an artist. There's a luxury to being able to create things that and have a voice and have a platform potentially. I don't think I'm like at the point where I can influence the diaspora of the country. It would be nice to be able to promote others and which I try to do at the gallery. I try to bring really good artists that I get excited about to the gallery, and my track record is thin. I show them stuff and they're like, yeah, that's good. Oh, not that. No, thanks. So, I always try. And because I think it's always amazing to sort of see what other people get up to. And I also thought of this last night before that I've been at a few art shows lately and running into old friends who are good artists and are good artists. And when I say they say, oh, I'm not showing anymore. I've given that up. And then I say, oh, so what are you working on? And they're all making art still. And you see what they're doing. And it's like super amazing because they have no, there's like an ego removal from it. They don't anticipate showing anybody. And it's kind of like this, it's almost like they've hit this wonderful moment in their career that it should be shown, but the way they got there was not worrying about showing. Mm-hmm. So it's this dichotomy of of the problem of being artists and making good things.
How do you hope your art connects with or impacts your audience?
My favorite art or my favorite film or my favorite book or my favorite thing in general is when something has made me see the world in a different way. And that's not hard to do because your world gets smaller as you get older. It's like you get into routines, and I think it's really good to expose yourself to other ideas and other concepts, or else you just dig into what your beliefs were before, and you don't tend to evolve as a person or accept others. And I think that's sort of the death knell for not just an artist, but for anyone who wants to live in the world. So I listen to audiobooks when I paint, and I find that to be a good way to kind of ingest new information and keep me focused in the studio for, some of the books are 11 hours. There's one that I'm listening to is 44 hours, maybe 33 hours. I can't remember. But yeah, some of them some of them are really good. They expose you to new ideas or make you reinforce some ideas that you think you had. Like I just listened to on tyranny, and one of the things they said was one of the ways to combat tyranny, and a simple thing to do, is get a passport. So don't stay in your own country. I know travel can be horrible for the environment, but I do like the idea of exposing yourselves to other cultures and other people's ideas, and not sort of just digging into your own problematic or small world, right? And it keeps speaking of the idea of luxury, but I think it's also privilege and access to be able to do those things, travel and be able to expose yourself to new things. And if you can't do that, I think reading is essential. That's why I love libraries so much.
Are there any specific messages or feelings that you aim to evoke through your work?
Well, that goes back to portraiture. I think that I like the idea of accumulation of interests. So say if I paint a single image of someone's photograph, then if it's not the most important thing they've taken a photograph of, you're only getting a small snippet of who they are. And again, from a vantage point of someone standing behind a camera, and you don't get smell, you don't get taste, or you don't hear anything. It's all visual. So that accumulation can only be done by multiple imagery that I have of that person. So the more that I investigate their body of work or my body of work, is the more you start to see commonalities. And sometimes it's idiosyncrasies, and maybe it's even problems. Like you always have the same tell or tick that comes up in a story. And that becomes sometimes, you can see it with movie directors. If you see the body of work and you know what to expect, are they evolving or are they refining their tastes? It's a question to ask around visual language, I think.
Who or what would you say has been your biggest inspiration throughout your artistic career?
Well, at different phases of my life, I would say it's the people around me, like the encouragement of people when I was younger, my parents researching how to, taking me to art galleries and asking people how they got into it, much like you're doing now. I think it's really great. My partner, her family, they went to art school too, and so the continuous exposure to art exhibitions and visiting museums afterwards was exceptional. And the way she thinks about making art is so different than the way that I do, that I find that very inspiring, because she'll talk to me about her ideas, and I'm like, how did you do that? Like, where did that come from? And tell me more about it. And I kind of love it. I kind of love when, like I talked about earlier, when I run into people and find out, like, they'll pull out their phone. It's the best thing to see. Like, now they have a visual record of what they're working on, and they show me something and they haven't shown anybody that thing.
I want to shift focus now. So in navigating the art world, have you found any misconceptions or challenges specific to being an artist in Canada?
You could write a book on that, probably. It's so, whose eyes are we looking through, Katie, in that question? Because as an artist and you go into a gallery, it's intimidating for some reasons, because you maybe want to be in that gallery, or you don't know how to access or talk to because of that, you go in with a maybe like no confidence. Or are you going to that gallery because you want to see a show and you're really excited about it? Or, I've taken friends to galleries who don't normally go to art galleries just to, because I think they would enjoy it, and they go with me, and they're very accommodating. And sometimes the words come out of their mouth. They're like, why do they make galleries so intimidating? And I'm like, they don't really do that. That's just you. It's designed to be quiet and contemplative space, and you can ask anyone here anything. But I think there is sort of maybe there is a cachet around it. Like, you're selling things that at a commercial gallery that to a select group of collectors, I imagine. So some people ask me how I got into the gallery I'm in, because it's a good gallery, and I feel very fortunate. And it wasn't one thing. It was several things that people did for me, because they were just genuinely nice people, and they didn't have to do that. The curator at the Art Gallery of Hamilton had Nicholas come through the John Scott was showing after me. I was with a group of people at it was called Painting Hamilton, because I'm from Hamilton, and so it was the Art Gallery of Hamilton that I was showing at with 6 other painters, I think. And I had one wall of work, and Nicholas was walking through the space to see where the John Scott show would go after ours. And he saw the work and talked to Melissa a bit about it, and she talked me up a bit, saying that, in a nice way. And then when I came to pick up the work at the end of the show, she told me about it. So I was prepped for that. At the same time, I had a collector who approached Nicholas saying that you should do a studio visit with this guy. So I had 2 people approaching Nicholas about me, and it was, I didn't ask them to do it. They went out of their way to do it. It was an exceptional thing that I appreciated. And he came by for a studio visit, and he didn't know I was the same person that they both were talking about. So it just sort of lined up. But, the years before that, friends gave me shows that Melissa saw me, and I was at an art crawl in Hamilton. A friend of mine, Gary, lent me a space to show in Hamilton. It was just a raw commercial space, like open commercial space that hadn't been finished yet. And so we opened it during art crawl, and I think 5,000 people went through that show. So that got a lot of recognition to get the next thing, and it was. I don't want to say it's like I want to say that I was very lucky, and that type of. But I genuinely think that the people that were helping me were nice people, and that we made a connection, and they were really helpful in my career. And I think that it was sort of just the moral of the story is be nice to people, I guess, and then now I'm with the gallery, and they've been very encouraging, and I hope it continues like that, because I really like showing there, and I think it doesn't. I don't know if I'm any more deserving than anyone else to be in there. I know that so this is the thing. The idea was to talk about space and how I don't want to take it for granted.
I'm curious to hear your take on the current dynamics of the Canadian art scene.
Well, I'm a bit part in it. I think Canada it's an amazingly creative place. Like I'm not bored of the artists out there. They make incredible things. I lived in the UK for over a year, and I feel like I don't know if the volume of people or the risk of the buying public, but it feels like there's an audience for collecting, which means that I don't know if artists can take bigger risks, or if there's or you're just seeing the riskier artists make it. That's I don't know what the makeup is there, and in the States, I'm not sure if it's the same. But in Canada, it's really nice to see. I don't know. I think the dialogue is good. I think that the institutions are hopefully doing the right things and inviting the right people to show there. But you do hear missteps here and there, and people being let go when maybe they shouldn't have been from an institution, or I don't know. It's really hard to navigate or negotiate or understand the complexities of an institution. I mean, that's on a more grand scale. That seems to be something that you have very little control over. But on the artist level, if I go to an art fair or a show, and I see someone who's maybe having their first show and it's like their work's incredible, it's I find that super encouraging, because it means that we're not stale, and people are still able to do new things with old materials. Like what we're making are not like paintings and photographs and sculptures and installations have now been done for decades and sometimes centuries, and it's incredible to see something new with that. It blows your mind. I'm not bored of the Canadian art scene at all.
Are you currently working on anything now that you might be able to share with us?
I am working on a few paintings for the gallery, and I say that for the gallery because we don't have a show lined up yet, and it's usually I need to get a body of work for me is about 12 to 18 pieces. And I've got a handful on the go. And yeah, they're fun. I'm learning. I went to there's a really good art restorer named Laszlo at Restore Art, and he has tried to teach me how to change my the surface I'm working on to make it a little more archival, and it's a bit messy because I'm not as good at it as she is. I'm experimenting with that, and they're coming out fine, but it's kind of a fun process to try something new, and it's not going to change the paintings. It's just going to change the substrate. But that's so I'm working on those right now, and they are, it's interesting because your practice evolves always, and sometimes it evolves in small increments, and sometimes it does it in great leaps. I think I've always been a small increment person. I've seen other people who do these great leaps, and it's always impressive. But I always try to push myself a little bit more. So this one will be scale. I think I'm going to work a bit bigger on some of the pieces I'm working on.
So Matthew, where can everyone find your work?
I have a website, matthewschofield.com. The most current work, I think, would be with Mativier Gallery. So they usually put the most current work that I've got up there. I have a couple of other galleries in the States, Rice Pollock in Provincetown, and Snap Orlando in Orlando, and Zia Gallery in Chicago. And then Instagram, my Instagram handle is at Schofield_Matt. And I don't post often, but when I do, I try to show kind of process pieces, I guess. Just whenever I leave the studio for the day, I take a picture of the painting I'm working on so that if I think about it that night, I can look back and say, oh yeah, it's okay. You don't have to go back.
Well, Matthew, we are very much looking forward to seeing what's next for you and what it is that you're working on now. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Katie. It was nice.
Thank you for joining us on ArtBeat, where the stories of Canadian art come to life. Follow us on Instagram at ArtBeat Podcast for exclusive content and previews of what's to come. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to stay updated with our journey through the world of Canadian art. Enjoyed the episode? Leave a review or recommend us to a fellow art enthusiast. Together, let's keep the conversation going and deepen our connection to the diverse world of Canadian art. See you next time.